Alright everybody, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to continue talking about PHP, PDO, and really tying the two together and working with a database. For this one I'm going to focus a little bit more than on the Lab 8 files. And so there are a couple files that I've provided you for Lab 8. Inside of the Labs folder there's a Lab 8 support material, or gosh, I just forgot what I called it. Yeah, Lab 8 support material folder. Inside of there are two files. One is called protected.php and one is called lab8template.php. And the goal behind this lab is to implement a very basic login system. And the purpose of doing that is to allow us, or give us at least just a little opportunity to work with the database. Our users are going to provide us with a username and password. We're going to create a query that selects the data out of the table, that table that we've been working with the last couple lectures, and if the username and password match, then we'll give them access to the protected page. If they don't match, then we'll deny them access and tell them that the login failed. What I did is, again, I'm going to stay inside the VM for this example. Inside of the HT, so that your document root, inside of the HTML folder, I created a Lab 8 folder. And then I moved those two files in, so protected.php and lab8-template.php. Lab 8 template looks like this, and what we're going to add, or what you have added to this then, is a very basic login form. Let's see. There's something I forgot to mention and I wanted to point out with the last video, and that is errors. We are now at a point where it's easy to generate errors within our application, syntax errors. With JavaScript, we can look at those errors inside of the console with our developer tools. With PHP then, a common place to look is inside of the error log that is generated or maintained by the Apache web server. In order to do that, where you can go is to, there's a command from the command line called tail. Tail gives you the last 10 lines of a document. If we tail, and the location of that error log is in var log apache error.log. If we tail that file, that'll give us the last 10 lines. That error log then is where syntax errors, anything that's any error related to our PHP scripts, that's where those errors are logged. It's chronological, so the newest error messages are logged to the bottom of the file. And so if you tail the file, you get the last 10 lines, which gives you the 10 most recent, or close to anyway, the most recent error messages. You can see inside of my error log, I have a couple of entries. It's a little bit harder to read. What you're looking for is the date and time, the type, and oftentimes you get process ID and client ID, and then the message itself. And what's nice about this is oftentimes the message will give you exactly what it was and in what file and what line number. Okay, so this is very helpful because sometimes you'll go and you'll refresh your page, or you'll interact with your page, and you'll just get a white screen. And what that white screen typically indicates is that there was a syntax error in your PHP. PHP could not process the page, couldn't finish the request, and so you want to go and check your error log. One thing that I oftentimes do when I start doing a lot of PHP development is if you do the -f argument with the tail command, then that just follows that log file. And so every time a new error is generated here, the console is just following that file, monitoring it for changes, and it'll automatically update your display. And so I usually keep this open somewhere on my desktop so that I can watch for those syntax errors and catch those hopefully a little bit quicker. Let's see then. As far as the lab then, the files, what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to be working out a Lab 8. And you're going to start off with this template file. It's going to look just a little bit different. What I've done with that file is I've left a lot of to-dos, statements in there for you to complete the lab. And so that'll be the purpose of the lab. A lot of this we're going to go through together. And so if you're watching the video, you're paying attention to following along, that should help you quite a bit. To start off with, this is going to look very similar to the original file that we worked on in the last couple of videos, or at least in the last video. Some additional methods, some additional functionality that I've added to it is looking for a post method. And so one thing that we haven't really had a chance to talk about a lot yet is how we send information back and forth from the client to the server. And we have two primary methods. We have a get method and a post method. And with those methods, those determine how data is transferred from the client to the server. Get methods, you typically see inside of a URL. You typically see inside of a query string. And I think a very simple example would be to go and execute a search on Google. That is, you can see that as we execute values here, where our search parameter, it shows up the question mark, and then we have key value pair, q equals dsu.edu. That is how we're sending information, a GET request, the query string, the data is being passed in a key value pair inside of the URL. Right. The other method, the other predominant method, is the POST method, in which case the data is still presented in a key value pair, but it's part of the request body, and so it shows up if you have to get into a little bit more detail with how the HTTP request headers are sent and the response headers are sent, it's part of a body. Commonly, the way that you determine which one to use is off the type of information. If it's more sensitive information, usernames and passwords, logins, that's more sensitive, then we typically post that. If it doesn't really matter, like a search query, then it's typically a GET method. Right? So for this particular example, I've got all this working for you, and this is code that allows us to check that if this page is being posted to, if the client has sent information, posted information to this page, then this method will be true. The server request method will equal post, and it'll be true. And that's why this PHP will execute. Otherwise, it won't. And so what we can see here with this page is that when we just visit the page, we're not posting information. So none of that logic executes. When we fill in the form field and click login, now we're posting to it. We're submitting a form, which makes this condition true and allows us to enter this branch and execute all of this code. Right? The form itself, this is how we write these forms. And again, this is a little bit of a crash course here because I just don't recall. I don't think we've talked about these forms yet. So form, this is the method, whether it's post or get. In this case, it's going to be a post. And the action then is the page that we're going to submit that form to. In this case, you'll see this is very common with PHP forms, and this is just telling us to submit it to itself. Okay. From there, we have a couple of buttons, input types. One's a password, one's a user. And then we have the ID and the name. So user and user, password and password. That's how we get those. We know how to get those form field values. And then we have a button that is a submit button, which causes that form to post back. All right, so user fills in those values, fills in those text boxes, and clicks that button. That causes this form to post to this page. We check for that post back right here. And if it is being posted back, then we set up our code to check whether or not that username and password exists in our database. All right, so from there, we've got things very similar to our last example. We connect to our database, so make sure that you fill in the appropriate values here. One thing that we have to change now is the fact that we're not selecting all of the results. We're not getting all of the records in that table. We want to get a specific one. We want to get one record where the username and the password match. If the username and the password match, that record exists, then we can authenticate that user. If the username and the password do not match, then that user doesn't exist. It's an invalid login. And so how we do that with PDO, and I'm going to break this onto 2 lines just to make it a little bit easier to see. All right, so if I do that, you have to do concatenation. Okay, so before we had essentially just this statement, so select star from user. Now we're adding a where clause, and this changes that basic structure of creating a statement, connected to a database, creating a statement, preparing it, and executing it, because what we're doing is we're essentially adding some placeholders. It's almost like variables within our SQL statement. So we're saying where username equals, and this is our user supplied value, and password equals, and this is our user supplied value. These values have a colon and then the name of that placeholder. So for each example here, we have colon username, colon password. These are the columns from the table. right? And so this statement, what we're looking for is a record where both the username equals whatever the user supplied and the password equals whatever the user supplied. Okay, from there, we prepare the statement just like we did previously. The only other thing that changes now is that when we execute, we have to replace these placeholders with the value from the user, right? And how we do that then is to declare inside of the execute. So the execute function will take one argument, and what we're providing it then, see if I can make this a little bit bigger, is a series of really key value pairs. This matches up to the placeholder. So I have one placeholder called :username, right? And I replace it with the value from the user. And I have another placeholder called :password. So I have this key, and I'm using the syntax equal, greater than, and then the value that I want to replace it with. Right? This is a global array. So there are a handful of global arrays that are available in PHP that we have access to. $_post is one of those, and that it is all of the values that have been posted back to the server. In this case, we can access that because we know that we're handling a post request. And so we can say $_post. This value then matches up to the name of those form fields, right? Not the ID, it's the name. Okay, so you need to make sure that if you modify this field at all, these input elements at all, that you have that name attribute set. And so those name values become the index into this array. So this is how we access the value that the user supplied in that text box. Okay, so username placeholder is replaced with the value in the text box from our post array, and the same with the password. Same exact format there. Okay. That executes the statement, and now we have a row count. So we can say select row count just like we did previously, because we're either going to have a result set or not. We're looking for either a row count of 1 or not 1, in which case then we know that it's either valid or invalid. And so the next challenge here in structuring this logic is to set up the two branches. We have two logical branches that the application can go down. Whether or not we have a valid login or whether we have an invalid login. And so this is the basic structure in order to do that. From there, I've left some hints. Okay, we need to start the session. We need to set a session value, and then we can redirect that user to the protected page. Otherwise, they've failed, and we want to display a message saying that their login has failed. Okay, and if everything's working, you should be able to get, you can see I've got an error message here. It looks pretty bland, but if I type in something that's invalid, I click login, you can see that it displays that login failed message. If I type in a value that is correct and I log in, you can see that it has redirected me to the protected page. How does a protected page work? Well, this is very, very simple, just to demonstrate the mechanisms, the core mechanisms behind a login system. We have our session start, and then we check the session, which is another global array. We check this value, if it's set, and if it equals to true, and if it doesn't, we redirect them back to the login page. Right? If it does, then we go ahead and allow them access to it. And so what this is doing, this statement right here, this if statement, is preventing anyone who is not logged in, preventing them from getting access to this page. It's preventing them from accessing this page. If they are logged in, then they'll get access, and you'll see that this comes up. This message here comes up. And so if you visit this page without logging in, it'll just redirect you back to the login page. It's protected. If you are logged in, then you get this text here. You're allowed access. Right? So how does it do that check? Well, we have another global array in PHP in which we can set and save things for the session. Remember way back at the beginning of the semester and a little bit throughout, we've talked about session. We've talked about the fact that HTTP is stateless and that applications, websites themselves have no inherent ability to keep track of the user between requests. How we do that then is through cookies and through the server and the memory and the application. We have something called a session on the server, And what session start does is it establishes your session for you. It tracks you via a particular token, which you set in a cookie value. It tracks you and creates that unique, correlates your activity uniquely within the application itself. In order then to save data between all of your requests with an application, we have this $_session array. And it's an array. And so just like the other arrays that we've been using with PHP, we can set an index using a string value. We don't have to use a numeric value. And then we can set values. So I can say that for this particular session, I can say that I have a key called logged_in, and it has a value equal to true. And now, because I've started that session, this is unique to me visiting the site. This is unique to me as a client, as a user of this application. I can check that session later on in other pages. And so we set that session. This is a way in which we can cause a redirection. So we tell the client, we send it a header that changes the location to a different page. And so now we have that session variable that we can check later on in the application. So I can check for logged in, right? Because that's the key right here that I used. So I can check that to see that it is set and that its value is equal to true. Whoops, actually it should be not equal to true, sorry. It's not equal to true. If it's not set and it's not equal to true, in fact, this should be or, then locate redirect away. If it isn't, so that means that it is set and it is equal to true, then we have a valid login, and we can go ahead and then the rest of this would be an actual functional page. Maybe it'd be your orders, maybe it'd be your account, maybe it'd be your profile, maybe it'd be whatever it would be. You know, this is just to demonstrate that you have gained access to it. You've passed this check, right? Is set, that's another function that's available within PHP, and what that allows you to do is to look for a value. It looks for this being set, this particular element in our global session array. If it's not set, we can't access the value. So first we check to make sure that it's set, perform logical negation. So if it's not set, or it is set, session logged in, but it's not equal to true, then we go ahead and redirect them away. We use that header just like I used in this template file. Okay, so I just want to run through that one more time, just hopefully to make sure that it's clear what's happening here. This page, again, this is a very common method or structure for a PHP application, and that we have a combination of PHP and HTML and CSS. When you first request this page, we check for a post method because the application is not posting. Right now, when I go here and I just hit enter and I visit this link, we're not posting anything. That logic is not true. The statement, this condition is not true. So we don't execute any of that code. So we continue on. We have a form, we have the div, we have all the rest of the page, and that's just return, which is what we see here. To send data back to an application, we can either post or we can get. And in this case, what we're going to do is I have a form set up with a post method. So here can be post or get. In this case, we're going to use post. And the action is to post back to itself. Every time we allow users to submit information to our server, to our web application, we have to tell it where to go. Where does that information need to go? And we want to submit it to this page. You're not sure? You can always come in here. You can inspect this element. You can look at this HTML. And you can see that there is no, the action is blank, which is fine because the default then is to submit to itself. It's to post back to lab8-template.php. Okay, the information is posted. The information gets sent using this name attribute. So key value pair. The key is this value. The value then is whatever the user typed into that text box. Right? And then this button type submit is what triggers that form to submit. It submits that information back to this page. Okay, so then on a request for application where the form is submitted, we check this is now true. And so we go through, we set up our connection, okay, database handle. We set up our select statement. And so we have to modify that in order to provide the where clause so that we can select based off of the username and the password, right? We're taking now user supplied input to dynamically change the way our application is behaving in order to allow them to authenticate. We prepare the statement, right? So this is just an SQL statement with placeholders. These placeholders use a colon. Once we've prepared, now we execute. And at the time that we execute, that is when we provide values for those placeholders. And so this argument is an array. The array then has a bunch of key value. So the key is the placeholder, :username, :username, password, and the value comes from our form. Okay, we have a global array called $_post. The index is the name attribute from that input field, right? So we have two input fields, password and user, and so we can access those values, $_post, user, and password. Okay, you got to watch the syntax here, the commas and the parentheses, make sure everything matches up. If you're getting errors, if your page is not working, if you're just getting a white screen, keep in mind to check your error log. Okay, from there, this executes the statement. It replaces these placeholders with these values. This makes it a little bit safer against SQL injection. And then, once we've executed, we can get things like the row count. Right? In this particular case, and for this lab and this demo, we don't necessarily need any properties. We don't need the username or the password. We just need to know if row count equals 1, then there was a successful login. We found one record that matches. If row count was not equal to 1, then there was something wrong. It should only be 0, which means it was an invalid login. If for some reason it's greater than 1, there's a bigger problem in that we have two users with the same username and password, and that's a problem as well. Right, so for now though, all I care about for this particular demo and this particular lab is that you either have a row count of 1 or 0. So we have an if-else, so we have two branches, valid login, invalid login. Invalid login is pretty straightforward. We just need to be able to generate a message that says that there is an invalid login. Okay, if we go down the else branch, we don't execute any of this code, and we can escape our PHP, have a little bit of HTML here, and then open PHP back up to make sure that we finish the valid syntax for those for that if statement. Both of the if statements that we're inside of right now. As far as if the row count is equal to 1, then just like we talked about, we start the session, we access the session array, that global array. We define an index called login equals true, set it equal to true, and then we can use this header with a value, a string value, its location, colon, and then the page that we want to redirect to. Right? If everything works for you, if this application works exactly right, then if the user logs in, redirects to protected page, and they see this message here. If they try to access this page without logging in, it should redirect them back to the login page. If they log in and their credentials are not valid, then it gives them a little error message that says that their credentials were invalid. Login failed, or you have access to protect a page. So that's a really simple example. Keep in mind that this is not 100% the way that you would do the login. And so if you do find yourself at some point down the road building login authentication systems in an application, there's a little bit more that we'd want to do here. But hopefully this gives you a very practical example, relatively real world, and gets you comfortable, or at least working with the basics of querying data, starting the session, and checking for these values across at least 2 pages in a very, very simple, oversimplified application. So let's see. I think that's about all I want to cover. Again, if you have any questions, if something here does not make sense, or you feel like we've jumped too far in kind of difficulty, let me know, so that I can certainly provide either more lecture or some one-on-one, as well as make adjustments for future classes. So let's see. That's all I have. Again, any questions, let me know. Otherwise, you'll notice that I made a slight change in the schedule. I'll be introducing MVC, but we won't be necessarily doing a lab or anything for it. So we'll talk about that in the next video though. All right, that's all I got. I'll see you guys then. Thanks.